My name is Karen, and if you had seen me that December morning in Seattle, you would never have guessed that I carried such a silent weight. Ever wondered what it's like to feel invisible to those we love the most? I felt it, and it hurt more than any cold that ever cut my skin. I spent my entire life dedicated to my daughter, Emily, raising her with love, sleepless nights, hot meals even when my own hunger screamed. And yet, I felt that there was something breaking between us, a distance that I couldn't explain. Life had a routine that seemed peaceful: breakfast with newspaper, cups of tea warming my hands, the porch looking out over the snow-covered trees. But inside, I felt an uneasiness, a constant doubt about whether Emily still saw me as she once did. Memories of laughter, tight hugs, stories told before bed, contrasted with the silence that now separated us. I knew something was about to happen, something that would change the way I saw her family, and not just for a moment, but forever. In this video, you'll discover how a Christmas that seemed ordinary turned into a proof of courage, love, and quiet justice. I'm going to share every detail, every emotion, so that you understand how life sometimes forces us to protect those we love, even when all seems lost. Because sometimes being a mother means facing the impossible, and I learned that the hard way. I held Emily in my arms and felt the cold that seemed to have become ingrained in her bones, her every trembling cutting through my heart like an invisible knife. I ran with her into the house, leaving trails of snow that melted on the hardwood floor, while the fireplace in the background burned nonchalantly, and the laughter of Ryan and his family still echoed annoyingly through the hallways. I took off the thick coat I wore myself and wrapped it around her, trying to at least offer my body warmth. His small hands sought to grasp any bit of security that might exist, and I felt every quickening beat of his heart, mixed with my own growing anger. I knelt before her, looking into her red, swollen eyes, and whispered words I could barely utter. "I'm here, my love. No one is going to hurt you now." I wanted her to believe me, even for a few seconds, even if the pain was too deep to be erased so easily. But inside, the anger against Ryan and his family grew like an uncontrollable fire. I saw them laughing, toasting, and ignoring my daughter's need, and I felt a mixture of hatred and powerlessness that paralyzed me for a moment. Every memory of months I tried to be there for Emily, every phone call she cried alone, every gesture of support they despised, came back to my mind in a painful avalanche. I tried not to yell, not to confront anyone yet, because I knew that any explosion could make the situation worse, could break the fragile trust that was still left in Emily. I dragged a chair by the fireplace and sat with her on my lap, still wrapped in my jacket, offering hot tea that didn't even seem enough to warm her body, let alone her soul. His every breath came in suppressed sobs, and I held his hand so tightly that I felt my own fingers fall asleep. He wanted her to know that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to blame herself for being left outside, and that she shouldn't fear those who claimed to be family. At the same time, I felt vulnerable, weak in a way I hadn't remembered feeling in a long time. The emotional exhaustion of years of sacrifice and silence finally hit me. But even in the midst of this inner storm, a quiet strength began to emerge, a determination that he would not allow anyone to continue hurting Emily, that he would find a way to restore her dignity, that he would protect her in any way possible. I looked at her, and even in that state of fear and sadness, I noticed the small spark of hope that still shone in her eyes, and it was this spark that gave me the strength to take a deep breath and think about the next steps. I needed to act. I needed to plan. But I also needed to keep calm and safe in the present moment. With each passing minute, while Emily was still trembling in my arms, the certainty that something needed to be done increased. I knew that this Christmas would not end as it should, that this injustice could not go unpunished, and a persistent question hammered in my mind. How could I face an entire family alone, and still ensure that my daughter came out of this nightmare unscathed? I spent hours in that apartment in Boise, sitting at the kitchen table with still steaming cups of tea, reviewing text messages, call logs, and emails that Emily had received. Or rather, that she never received as she should have. Every missed notification, every ignored message, was like a blade going through my chest. I read Ryan's writings, full of sarcasm and contempt, and realized that it wasn't a distraction or carelessness, but a clear pattern, repeated over and over again. That negligence had intention. My heart ached to realize that each time Emily needed support or attention, they chose to laugh, ignore, or minimize her pain. And I, on the other side of the screen, felt helpless, wishing I could get in there and change everything. Every missed call, every unfulfilled promise to return, showed a hard truth. Emily was being deliberately pushed aside, treated as if she had no value. I remember it as if it were today, feeling the icy Boise winter air through the window as my thought raced, trying to piece together a cruel puzzle. I looked at the old messages, the ones where Emily, silent and suffocated, begged for attention and support, and I felt my blood boil. This wasn't just ingratitude, it was planned cruelty. I could imagine the laughter of the Whitlock family echoing through the halls, despising everything Emily stood for, as if her presence was a nuisance. And in that instant, as I held my tea with trembling hands, a fierce clarity came over me. There were no more doubts, no more excuses. I needed to act. I had to find a way to protect my daughter, to prove that what she suffered was not coincidence, but psychological abuse. And even in the midst of that silent anger, I felt that my strength was returning, that strength that years of life, of losses and sacrifices had given me. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. I went through each message again, looking for details that could serve as evidence, anything that would show the extent of Ryan's and his family's contempt. I saw patterns, schedules, cutting responses, and each of them told me the same thing. Emily didn't deserve the treatment she received, and no one but me seemed to notice. I began to take notes, writing down dates, times, petty cruelties, every detail that could sustain the truth. It was exhausting, and my body ached from the mental and emotional effort, but I couldn't stop. Every tear I tried to hold back, every tightness in my chest, reminded me of the responsibility I had as a mother. I couldn't let Emily be forgotten, ignored, or humiliated. In the silence of my apartment, I could hear my own breathing, every heartbeat reminding me that despite all the pain, there was still hope. But there was also a question, a shadow over my mind. How do I face an entire family that seemed to believe it was above reproach, without further risking my daughter's safety and well-being? Every ignored message, every cut phone call, increased the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, and I knew that the next decision would need to be firm, calculated, leaving no room for error. The chill of the Boise night seemed to sink into my back, but it didn't stop me. I was determined. And then, an idea began to emerge, like a spark in the darkness. Maybe there was someone who could help me, someone who understood what was going on, someone who could witness and document what had hitherto been invisible to everyone else. I took a deep breath, feeling the mixture of fear and determination propel me. I knew that the journey ahead would be long and complicated, but I was finally sure of one thing. The truth about Emily would not be ignored any longer. And in that instant, a premonition chilled my spine. I was about to discover even deeper secrets, and it could change everything I thought I knew about Ryan and his family. I remember like it was yesterday, the sleepless nights holding Emily in my arms, trying to calm her down when the world seemed too heavy for her. Every fever, every cry in the middle of the night, I was there, indifferent to the fatigue that crushed my body and mind. I remember her birthdays, when I would spend hours decorating the house with colorful balloons and preparing cakes that melted in my mouth, trying to create moments that she would remember for the rest of her life. I was proud of every smile that lit up her face, and every tight hug was a silent reward that warmed my heart. But looking at the present, feeling the coldness with which Ryan and his family treated her, all that dedication seemed to have been forgotten, ignored, as if it had never existed. I remember the vacation I put off to save money and make sure Emily could take music lessons or sports lessons, sacrificing my own comfort to see her talent flourish, only to realize that every effort was minimized or despised by those who should love her unconditionally. Every work trip I accepted, every extra hour at work, was a choice of love, and yet, her ingratitude now felt like a wall between us. I felt again the cold of the early mornings in which she cradled her, when her sobs filled the silent house and I could only hold her, whispering promises that everything would be fine. These memories now hurt more, because I see the brutal contrast between the care I gave and the neglect she suffered, realizing that the abandonment did not start yesterday, but grew silently, eroding what should be a relationship of trust and love. Every gesture of support, every investment of time and money, now shines as evidence of a dedication that was invisible to others, and anger and sadness mingle in my chest. I sit alone in the apartment, reliving every detail, every night, every smile and every tear, trying to understand how so much surrender was ignored, how my daughter's pain was so underestimated. And even with all the emotional exhaustion, a determination begins to emerge within me. I can't let all this past, all this story of love and sacrifice be forgotten or denied. I need to turn these memories into strength. I need to use every memory to fight for Emily, so that she is finally recognized and protected. But as I relive those scenes from the past, a chill runs down my spine. What if there are more hidden truths, secrets of what really happened behind that perfect family facade that Ryan and his family showed? What if the injustice that seemed so clear until now is just the tip of the iceberg of something even more painful and unexpected? I sat in the armchair by the window of my small apartment in Boise, watching the snow slowly fall on the rooftops of the street, and I felt a mixture of exhaustion and despair envelop me like a blanket too heavy. Emily slept in the room, her slow, steady breathing a reminder that I still had to protect her, but every memory of the past few weeks, the closed doors, the cold stares, and the cruel words of Ryan and his family made my chest tighten as if someone had placed an invisible hand on it. I stood there, in absolute silence, reflecting on all that was lost, all that was ignored and underestimated, sleepless nights, forgotten birthdays, sacrifices that would never be recognized. I felt helpless, an old woman trying to protect her daughter from a world that seemed willing to crush her mercilessly, but deep down, something began to ignite inside me, a silent spark of strength, the one you only find when you've come close to losing everything. And I thought to myself, if you're listening to me, you need to understand one thing. When someone takes everything away from you, the only thing left is to turn the pain into action. The tears came, not in great sobs, but like a silent river that flowed through my eyes, reminding me that crying would not make me any less strong, but it would remind me of whom I needed to protect. Every memory of Emily being pushed aside, every phone call ignored, every smile denied, pushed me forward, making me realize that I couldn't just mourn anymore. And even with the weight of failure and powerlessness, I began to mentally plan every step that could ensure her safety, every detail that could turn the tide of this silent injustice. The silence of the apartment was almost deafening, and at the same time it taught me that there was a hidden strength in stillness, that I needed to listen to my own inner voice to find courage. But then, a shadow of doubt has arisen. What if all this I plan is not enough? What if Ryan and his family are more cunning and cruel than I can imagine? Something told me that the greatest test was yet to come, and that the real battle would be much deeper than any direct confrontation. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart sink, and whispered to myself, if you think you've seen it all, you haven't seen anything yet. The worst, and the most important, is yet to come. I picked up the phone with trembling hands, feeling the weight of every decision I was about to make, and dialed the number of Jake, my former student who was now a police officer in Boise. Each touch seemed to echo in the silence of my apartment, filling the air with the tension of a secret about to be revealed. When he answered, I felt a thread of relief run through my heart. His firm, recognizable voice brought a sense of security I hadn't felt in months. I quickly explained Emily's situation, describing every little detail of how she had been neglected, ignored, and humiliated by the Whitlock family. Jake listened attentively, without interrupting, mentally writing down every point I said, and I could feel that he took it seriously, that there was no room for doubt about the seriousness of the situation. I agreed with him on discreet surveillance. He and some colleagues could observe the family's routine, recording every abusive behavior, every moment of neglect that until then had gone unnoticed by everyone. As we spoke, I felt a mixture of hope and fear, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. It seemed that finally, I was beginning to regain control, turning my anger and powerlessness into concrete action, but the responsibility on my shoulders was still overwhelming. In the midst of the conversation, a silent tear streamed down my cheeks, reminding me of all the times Emily had cried alone, and for a moment I wondered if I would ever be able to repair the emotional damage she had suffered. I want you to stop for a moment and feel this with me. Sometimes fighting for someone we love means facing the impossible, even when fear and doubt consume us. If you've been through something similar, identify with this feeling of powerlessness and deep love. Leave a simple comment saying, "I know how it is," "I understand you," or "It's true," because it connects us in a way that words alone can't. After hanging up, I began mentally organizing all the evidence we could gather: text messages, call logs, photos of neglect, small signs that showed that their cruelty was not an accident, but rather an intentional pattern. Every detail I wrote down strengthened me, and I felt like I was stepping out of the role of victim and into the role of determined protector, ready to confront an injustice that seemed impossible to overcome on my own. But even with this spark of control, an unsettling feeling hung over me. What if they realize they're being watched? What if they try to hide it even more? If it becomes even more difficult to gather hard evidence? A chill ran down my spine as I imagined Emily alone, vulnerable, as I tried to organize every step without them knowing. But I also realized that there was no turning back. This was the first action of many, the first movement of a fight that could no longer be postponed. And as the clock silently ticked the hours of the night in Boise, a lingering question grew in my mind, as heavy as the snow falling outside. Will this surveillance reveal only what we already know? Or will it expose even deeper secrets about Ryan and his family? Secrets that could change everything we think about what really happened to my daughter. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, messages, and recordings that were supposed to be evidence, but now seemed useless in the face of the barriers that appeared at every step. I tried to call the police station to formally register the abuses, but found that some recordings would not be accepted, rejected by technicalities that left me with a sense of overwhelming helplessness. My heart ached at the thought of Emily, so frail and scared, sleeping in her room, not knowing what was going on, while I fought a system that seemed to tilt in favor of the Whitlock family's cruelty. Every missed call, every subtle threat we received, every look of disdain when we tried to record the truth increased my fear, but it also intensified the quiet resolve that grew inside me. I knew that any misstep could put my daughter at risk, but I also knew that I couldn't back down. The hours passed, and the cold of the Boise night penetrated the walls of the apartment, mixing with the suffocating tension he felt in his chest. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my ideas, as I felt the weight of years of accumulated sacrifices and the frustration of seeing justice so far away. It was in this silence, in this lowest point of hopelessness, that I realized that the real battle was still just beginning. And then, as I stared at Emily asleep, a burning question popped into my mind. What if the next step reveals something no one expected? Something that will forever change the fate of our family? I spent hours that night in front of my desk, looking at every piece of paper, every message on Emily's phone, every record that could prove the contempt of Ryan and his family. I could no longer stand still, watching my daughter suffer and the injustice go unanswered. I knew I needed a plan, a clear path that would lead us to protect Emily, while also making sure the truth came out. I began to list every abuse, every little detail that, when put together, would show the pattern of neglect and cruelty she had been suffering for months. My hands trembled with nervousness and anger, but also with a quiet determination. It was time to act. I needed allies, someone who could help me gather reliable evidence and witnesses, and my thoughts went back to Jake, that former student I had taught in my dojo days, now a police officer. I called him discreetly, explained everything, detailed every gesture, every word, and felt that he understood the urgency of what was happening. He was willing to help us with surveillance and recording of each incident. As I planned, I realized that my mind was clearer than ever, every decision made carefully, every step measured. I began to feel the long-forgotten sense that I could really change the course of events, that we were no longer just victims, but agents of history itself. With each note I wrote, each detail I documented, my heart beat faster, mixing fear and hope. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. I gathered everything in an organized folder, ready to be used if we needed to present each piece of evidence at the right time. I planned observation routines, times when we could record abuse discreetly, ensuring that Emily was protected and that nothing went unnoticed. Every detail of the plan was designed to avoid unnecessary confrontations, to keep my daughter's safety above all else. However, while structuring everything, a sense of apprehension set in, one that makes us realize that the real battle is about to begin. Something told me that what was to come would be more challenging than anything I had ever faced, that Ryan and his family would not give space easily, and that every move needed to be meticulously calculated. I looked at Emily sleeping, her face serene and vulnerable, and silently promised myself that I wouldn't allow anyone to hurt her again. But deep down, an insistent question hammered my mind. What if the truths we're about to discover are deeper and more dangerous than we can imagine? What if the next step reveals a betrayal I never expected? I spent the next morning steeped in phone calls and notes, reaching out to local lawyers in Boise who could understand the gravity of Emily's situation, consulting with old friends in the community who still remembered the affection we had always had, and seeking advice from financial experts who could help protect any recourse my daughter was entitled to. Each call brought a mixture of hope and tension, because each person who answered could be the key to the truth finally coming out. I organized all of Emily's messages, call logs, emails, correspondence, and medical reports, each carefully numbered and cataloged, like pieces of a puzzle that, if assembled correctly, would show the pattern of abuse and neglect that had hitherto been ignored. As I reviewed each document, I felt again the weight of the nights I spent awake holding Emily, the times I saw her pain minimized or scorned, and I realized that all this painstaking collection was more than just evidence. It was a silent declaration of love, a promise that I would not allow anything else to hurt her. Looking at that pile of papers, I realized that justice can be slow and unfair, but that every little detail could turn the tide, and that my patience and strategy would now be essential. And I thought to myself, if you've ever felt like life has turned everything against you, you know that the next action can change everything, and I feel like we're about to live in that moment. Every step I took had to be calculated, because one false move could give Ryan and his family a chance to manipulate everything again. But there was also something exciting about knowing that I was starting to control the narrative, that every carefully recorded detail could finally speak for Emily. And even as the Boise cold rolled through the apartment window and I felt my body tired, my heart was alert, ready for whatever came next. But a shadow of doubt followed me. What if, during this process of investigation and evidence collection, we discovered something even deeper? Something that would completely change the perception we had of the Whitlock family and the extent of Emily's suffering. As I reorganized all the evidence I had gathered, a stack of documents caught my attention unexpectedly. These were financial records, account statements that showed transfers that should never have happened, expenses that Emily had never authorized, and small manipulations that indicated a deliberate attempt to control every aspect of her life. Leafing through those papers, I felt anger rise inside me, mixed with the incredulity of realizing how much the Whitlock family had masterminded and hidden their cruelty. Every detail seemed to confirm what I had already suspected, but which was now impossible to ignore. The negligence and manipulation were not accidental. They were planned, cold, and cruel. As I reviewed and recorded each piece of evidence, I also came across old messages from Emily to me, in which she tried to explain small episodes in which she was emotionally manipulated, trying to please everyone, and constantly being diminished. It hurt as much as it was revealing, because it showed that her pain was not just emotional, but strategic, a form of control that no one else seemed to notice. I paused and wondered, how can some memories be so powerful that they mark us forever? Those little messages, those accounts and records, were pieces of history that screamed silently. And I wondered if you, who are listening to me now, also have a moment like this stored in your own chest of memories, something that marked you deeply, that you never forgot, or that still gives you strength or fear. If you've been through something similar, or know someone who has experienced something like this, let me know in the comments. Share something special, even if it's small, because these stories connect us in ways we can't even imagine. But as I reflected, my heart tightened, and a sense of urgency washed over me. These additional discoveries were not just information, they were crucial pieces that could change everything, reveal the extent of the manipulation, and open the door to confronting injustice once and for all. Every detail I gathered, every piece of evidence uncovered, brought me closer to the moment when I would finally have to confront Ryan and his family, and the tension was rising by the minute. I knew it wasn't time to act yet, that I needed to carefully plan every move. but I also felt that we were on the verge of a revelation that no one could ignore. And as I stared at all that evidence strewn across the table, a burning question popped into my mind. What if what I was about to uncover exposed even more secrets? Secrets that could forever change not only Emily's life, but reveal the true face of the Whitlock family in a way no one expected. I held tight to the envelope with the last pieces of evidence I had gathered, took a deep breath, and walked to the room where Ryan and Evelyn were busy with dinner. My every step seemed to echo in the heavy silence of their home, and I felt my heart beat as fast as the days when I ran to comfort Emily in the cold of the porch. But this time, it wasn't just running, it was purpose. As I approached, I realized that they barely noticed my presence, so immersed in their own arrogance that they completely forgot about me, as if I were invisible. I decided that I would not scream, I would not make scenes, but I would let my words, measured and firm, be a silent blow, impossible to ignore. "Ryan, Evelyn, we need to talk," I said, my voice low but loaded with authority. They turned around in surprise, and for a moment I noticed the shock in their eyes. That wasn't the submissive Karen they knew. I cut to the chase, calmly but unhesitatingly describing every detail of Emily's neglect and manipulation, every ignored message, every cruel gesture, every poisonous word I had so patiently documented. Evelyn opened her mouth to interrupt, but I continued, keeping my gaze steady, making it clear that every piece of evidence in my hands was confirmation of a reality they could no longer deny. "You think no one noticed, that you could act cruelly and get away with it. But the truth is clear," I continued, and I felt my tone, though restrained, reverberate strongly. Ryan widened his eyes, and his expression of superiority began to dissolve, replaced by a mixture of doubt and discomfort. I knew I was hitting the right target, that my every word planted a seed of insecurity in the fertile ground of their arrogance. Evelyn tried to argue, but I realized that even she felt the firmness of what I said, the weight of silent justice that I carried in my voice. I talked about Emily, about what she had lost, about the love that had not been recognized, about the cold she had felt, and the nights when no one cared. Every sentence was a bridge between my determination and the truth they didn't want to face. And then, as I kept control of the situation, I felt a wave of silent power wash over me, the same one that had grown in the last few weeks of planning and surveillance, a force that said it would not back down. I watched every reaction, every micro-expression, and I realized that even if they didn't admit it out loud, they were shaken. And in that moment, I realized something important. Calm can be more devastating than any scream, firmness more powerful than any threat. But even with the evident shock, a shadow hung over me, reminding me that this was only the first part of the battle, that the terrain was far from safe, and that any carelessness could be costly. As I walked away, keeping Emily in my mind, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, and an insistent question echoed in my heart. What if this first show of strength reveals only the surface of what they are really capable of? And what if the next step requires of me a courage that I don't yet know if I possess? I took the mail ready, carefully written by the lawyer, and felt a mixture of nervousness and determination run through my body. Every word written was a silent declaration that he would no longer allow Emily to be manipulated or diminished, that he would no longer accept excuses or justifications from Ryan and his family. I sent legal notices, setting clear boundaries on any contact, any attempt to control or interfere in Emily's life. At the same time, I ended all financial ties that still held some sort of influence over us, ensuring that no resources could be used against my daughter or used to keep her submissive. I sat up and took a deep breath, feeling an unexpected relief mixed with a deep emptiness. It was as if, by cutting these ties, I had freed not only Emily, but also myself from years of quiet anguish. Every decision I made that afternoon reinforced my conviction. The pain and suffering fueled my courage, and the sheer coolness I now displayed was the armor that would allow me to face any future retaliation. But even as I felt this sense of liberation, an uneasiness grew within me, a premonition that, despite the official breakup, Ryan and his family would not so easily accept the loss of control. I knew that those steps I took were only the beginning of a more complex battle, one that would require continued vigilance and meticulous attention. Each notification sent, each limit established, was a silent warning that we were finally positioning ourselves as protagonists of our own history and no longer as passive victims. I looked at Emily, her expression still scarred by fatigue and pain, and I felt the responsibility fold on my shoulders. It was now my duty to ensure that this newfound freedom became permanent, that the silent justice we sought was not only symbolic, but concrete. And as I pondered the next steps, an insistent question echoed in my mind. What if Ryan and his family have hidden letters, plans I haven't yet discovered? What if the real test of our mettle is about to unfold, in a way no one could have predicted? There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. The next morning, I received messages and calls from Ryan and Evelyn that made clear their desperation. There was no more arrogance or superiority, only pleas and desperate attempts at manipulation, a glimmer of fragility I never imagined I would see. They tried to convince me with calculated words that it was all just misunderstandings, that they could adjust the situation if I just gave them another chance. But the silent fury that grew in me wouldn't allow me to back down. Every call, every desperate email showed how much they depended on control over Emily, and how much they were used to using fear and charm as weapons. And I realized that the coldness I now displayed was exactly what they least expected. I read each of these messages and felt a mixture of triumph and caution. On the one hand, the emotional justice I had carefully constructed was beginning to take effect, exposing their true faces. But on the other, I knew I couldn't let my guard down, because that panic could turn into even more subtle and dangerous actions. I remembered all the times Emily suffered, how she cringed at every bitter word, and I realized that power had changed hands. Now I dictated the limits, and their every gesture was a reflection of the fear I instilled without even having to raise my voice. As I contemplated that change, a question hammered through my mind. What if their desperation leads to an unexpected last card, something I haven't yet imagined that could put our entire strategy at risk? I took a deep breath, feeling my heart race, but at the same time an absolute calm enveloped me, because for the first time in a long time, I knew I wouldn't be manipulated or intimidated. Their frailty was now visible, and every pleading I received only reinforced my conviction that every action I had taken was right, but a shadow of doubt remained, reminding me that the real test was yet to come. How would they react when they realized that I had not only confronted them, but that I had concrete proof of every lie and every abuse, and that there was no turning back? I sat in the small courtroom in Boise, holding tightly the briefcase with all the evidence gathered in recent weeks. The weight of every document, every message, every medical record from Emily seemed to pulsate in my hands, reminding me of every night I spent awake, planning every step to make sure the truth was finally heard. As I began to present the evidence, describing every cruel gesture and every poisonous word from Ryan and his family, I noticed the surprised and shocked looks from everyone in the room. My voice, though low and calm, carried a strength that could not be ignored. You think everything has been forgotten or ignored, but I'm here to show you that nothing has gone unnoticed, he said, feeling the rising tension turn into a quiet, powerful energy. Ryan and Evelyn's reaction was immediate. Wide eyes, quickened breaths, fake smiles trying to stand their ground, but which crumbled with each piece of evidence presented. At one point, I showed the recordings of conversations where Emily was humiliated and ignored, each word echoing in the room and carrying the weight of months of suffering. And then, a phrase escaped me, almost without realizing it, but with the strength of years of pain and hope. If you've ever felt that someone you love has been silenced, you know what it means to fight for justice to the end. And I felt, in that instant, that every single person in the room understood, even if silently, the gravity of what Emily had endured. The entire courtroom was silent. Every detail presented not only exposed the truth, but also turned the Whitlock family's fear and arrogance into embarrassment and powerlessness. With each trial he showed, he felt a mixture of triumph and caution, knowing that complete victory was not yet guaranteed, but that moral justice was finally being restored. I saw looks of empathy, whispers of understanding, and even jurors who were beginning to realize the true character of the antagonists. But even as I felt this quiet relief, a shadow of tension reminded me that the battle was not fully won. I needed to make sure that regardless of the final decision, the truth was acknowledged, and that Emily could finally breathe without fear. And as I collected the papers, watching Ryan and Evelyn silently crumble, a lingering question hammered through my mind. Will the next step reveal even more secrets they've tried to hide, and that can finally free Emily from all the shadow that has haunted her for so long? As I watched the muted reaction from the community and the people who knew Emily's story, I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Local news began to circulate. Comments on social networks multiplied, and every detail of the Whitlock family's manipulations, cruelty, and negligence spread like an echo impossible to ignore. Ryan, Evelyn, and even Abigail began to realize that the control they thought they had was an illusion, that every carefully constructed lie was being unmasked by the power of truth and the silent testimony of a mother who never gave up. I saw looks of contempt and embarrassment come from people who had previously admired or feared them, and I felt the discreet satisfaction of seeing their arrogance begin to crumble into small fragments, like a house of cards about to collapse. Public criticism was not just empty comments. They were the consequence of years of hidden actions finally exposed, and every message or report that revealed their cruel actions was a small silent victory that reinforced my conviction that all the handa and patience, all the planning, and every strategic step had paid off. Emily, though still frail, began to realize that she was no longer alone, that the injustice that had once seemed endless now had an answer, and I felt that sense of powerlessness finally begin to fade. But as pride and quiet satisfaction grew within me, a lingering concern remained. Their downfall was public, but what if there were still hidden moves, hidden strategies, or retaliation that could emerge unexpectedly and threaten the balance we had just achieved? After everything that happened, Emily and I began to rebuild our life in Boise, slowly, step by step. The first few days were quiet, but full of small gestures that reminded us that pain didn't have to define our future. Emily began to smile again, first shyly, then with that light in her eyes that I had almost forgotten existed. Each morning I would make coffee, sometimes pancakes, sometimes scrambled eggs, and we would sit together in the kitchen, feeling that even in our simplicity, we had found refuge. Sometimes I looked at her and remembered every night I ran to her porch to warm her in the cold, every tear I hid so as not to scare her anymore, and I realized that life gave us new opportunities for love and protection. There were days when the past came to the surface, a sudden reminder of the cruel words, the looks of contempt. But now, instead of consuming me, it strengthened me. I knew that we had survived not only by our strength, but by our ability to plan, wait, and act accurately, and this gave us a sense of control over what had previously seemed impossible. Emily began to talk more about her feelings, to open up about the fears that had accompanied her since the abuse, and I listened patiently, holding her hand and letting each word be a step towards healing. I often repeated to myself in a low voice, "Life teaches us, but it also gives us the chance to rewrite the ending." Our routine has become a dance of small habits of love and care, a way to rebuild trust and security. We strolled through the streets of Boise, watching the main square and the children playing, and in every echoing laugh, I saw proof that the world could still be kind, could still be fair in small gestures, even if great injustices existed. And as we walked, I reflected on everything we had been through, on the pain we had turned into learning, on the strength that emerged from fear and frustration. But even in this period of reconstruction, there was one question that kept with me. What if the outside world still brings unexpected challenges? If there are times when the courage we have shown will need to be reaffirmed? I knew that life was not a straight line, that there would always be shadows, but I also knew that we had learned to find light even in the most unexpected places. Every gesture Emily makes, every laugh regained, every look of confidence, was proof that we could go on in spite of everything, and that our story still had chapters to write. Chapters of love, strength, and most of all, freedom. Today, as I looked at Emily, sitting next to me on the porch of our small apartment in Boise, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. She smiled softly, watching the sunset tinge the horizon orange, and for the first time I realized that all the pain, all the struggle, had been worth it. Ryan and his family had lost not only the illusion of control, but also social credibility. Their manipulations were exposed, and they were now shadows of what they thought was power. Emily and I rebuilt our routine. Our laughter began to fill the spaces that were previously silent with fear and sadness, and I felt a light heart, with a sense of accomplishment, and that the silent justice I practiced had achieved its goal. The great lesson I take with me is simple, but profound. Love and resilience have strengths that no cruelty or lie can erase, and even in the darkest moments, our dedication and courage can transform lives. I know that many of you have felt the weight of injustice or helplessness in the face of situations that seemed impossible to overcome, and I want you to know that every act of courage, however silent, builds paths to freedom and dignity. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for each one who has accompanied me here, for every attentive look and every moment of empathy. The like you leave is like a hug that warms and supports this channel, and the subscription is like an invitation to meet again at the next cafe, sharing stories that warm the soul. Leave it in the comments of which city you are watching. Let's create a space for connection and support, and activate the bell so you don't miss it when the coffee is passed again. And don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.